Hi, I'm Owen Canfield with the Oklahoman, joined in Washington, D.C. today by our longtime Capitol correspondent, Chris Castile, to talk about our weekly update here, Chris, on life in D.C. We're talking on Wednesday, the 8th of June, and last night on Tuesday, Hillary Clinton officially got over the hump and won now is the presumptive nominee on the Democratic side for president, and of course Donald Trump had previously gotten over that threshold a few weeks ago. So that leads us into our first topic, which is the presidential election. You know, you've been a part of covering every presidential election since 1992 in your role up there in Washington. And I'm thinking you're about to see one of the more maybe interesting is the word to use, one of the more interesting campaigns during that time. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I mean, obviously, you know, there have been ones that have been interesting before for various reasons. You know, that first one in '92 with Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush, who was the incumbent, and Ross Perot.
Right.
The independent candidate in that one, who was actually a very prominent figure in that race.
Sure.
Was in the debates, as you might remember. But this one, and '08 was absolutely historic. You know, the Democratic primary, of course. You know,
Right.
when you had Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, you know, down to the bitter end there, and then the first African American Democratic presidential nominee. That was a really historic race in itself. But I think that's not what you mean here. Because we obviously have a very historic nominee now. You know, it's a very important moment in U.S. history to have the first woman as the head of, or as a major party nominee. And then we've got Donald Trump.
Right.
So, yeah, there is absolutely no telling what's going to happen this fall. But I think we saw at least a good hint of what Clinton's campaign approach will be in her speech last night. You know, I was a little surprised in that speech last night, given the historic nature of it. You know, how much of her speech was devoted to Trump and things that she said about Trump already. Really,
Right.
Nothing new. You know, that she hasn't talked, that others haven't talked about Donald Trump, and so. You know, she used that moment last night with a lot of the attention focused on her because of the historic nature of it to kind of lay out her fall campaign.
I'm cutting you off. I'm sorry. I wonder if some of it, though, the reason she would do that is because it's not like she just sort of came around and won the nomination. I mean, she's been on the scene for 20 plus years, and it's sort of been a foregone conclusion that she would get to this point. And so in that respect, it wasn't, I mean, while it's historic, it wasn't, it was sort of anticlimactic. Does that make sense?
That's absolutely a good point, right?
Well, and of course, she's going to spend the rest of her time, and as you might expect, assailing the Republican nominee. What do you expect to see from Trump? You know, last night his remarks were muted by Trump standards, and he's shown some of that along the way here. He's had nights where, after he's won a primary or whatever, he's been, you know, people would say, yeah, actually look kind of halfway presidential, and then he sort of reverts to form most of the time. So, Chris, do you expect that he will be able to show that other side more often from here to November, or should we expect what we've seen most of the time from Donald Trump?
I mean, obviously this is just a wild guess because I don't think anybody knows what to expect from Donald Trump, but I don't see how he just becomes a totally different person.
Right.
I mean, I don't think that he, goes 99% to using a teleprompter and has other people read his or write his speeches and he just reads them.
Yes.
Without you know, what has become, you know, kind of the characteristics of his public remarks, which are, you know, quite often, you know, airing personal grudges and, you know, demeaning people. I don't know how that, I don't know why anybody would expect all of that to stop, really.
Well, you're right. And you just want, if it were to happen, it would, I think, maybe cause people to scratch their head even more and say, well, who are we really getting here? You know,
right.
You can't, he'd be, probably unwise in a way to just deviate too much from what's gotten him where he is.
But I mean, he's going to have to rein it in. There's
right,
absolutely no question. I mean, I think that he's made life hard, and I've got no sympathy for them. I'm not trying to say that, but I mean, I think he's made life very hard for some Republicans, especially the ones here on Capitol Hill that are surrounded by media every day,
right,
asking them to react every day to something that Donald Trump said.
right, right.
And I mean, and I don't know if you saw that New York tabloid headline or New York tabloid front page today with Paul Ryan and Donald Trump and Ryan's point saying, "I'm with racist."
Oh, wow. No, I did not see
Yeah,
that.
no. But that's the kind of thing that they're going to have to expect. And it's just driving them insane right now to, I've worked many years to try to build up, their own sort of public persona,
Right.
and, their reputation to try to earn respect, as legislators, as statesmen,
Sure.
leaders. And then one comment by Donald Trump, that just makes them objects of ridicule.
Right.
The Washington Post really lit into Speaker Paul Ryan this week when he basically said, okay, that was a really racist comment, but I'm still backing it.
Right. Right. Yeah, you're right, puts a lot of Republicans, especially those in powerful positions up there in a tough spot, and those trying to win re-election. And along that line, it's a segue to the Oklahoma primaries that we have coming up here later this month, Chris, June 28th. You wrote about it the other day, the fact that all 5 U.S. House members here in Oklahoma, all of whom are Republicans, each have at least one challenger from their party in the primary, which is very, very unusual. Most of these men, or women as it may be at the time, have skated. They haven't had any intra-party challenges, and here they are. Every one of them has at least one challenger, which is a very, very interesting dynamic. And as we wrote about on our opinion page, I think it was in this morning's paper, it's a reflection of the frustration that people are seeing out of Washington.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and except for probably Jim Bridenstine in Tulsa, the incumbent congressman from Tulsa, all the challenges are from the right. The members being accused of not being conservative enough, and a lot of this goes back to the big spending bill that Congress passed in December. Is worth $1 trillion. Everything packed into that one bill, and that's just I'm saying the word wrong, so I'm just going to say that's the worst possible thing you could do to Tea Party, for the Tea Party types,
Sure.
And I mean there's absolutely no excuse to them, to Tea Party type conservatives, for voting for a bill like that. It defies everything that they stand for.
Right.
And you can say, well, they're just kind of a marginal part of the Republican Party. Well, the one thing, you've written about this yourself, how few people vote in Republican primaries. And I mean, it's even worse than runoffs. I don't think we're going to have runoffs out of any of the congressional races this time. But even just in primaries, very few Republicans vote.
Right.
And that gives people who are kind of wound up about something like this.
Yeah, the most. That's right. The most tapped in and the most energetic are going to show up to vote.
Right.
And that's who many of the Tea Party or whatever group you want to call, they get engaged.
Right.
And so,
but it's also what you said about this kind of just this general dissatisfaction. I think you quoted in your piece Tom Cole's comment about you're running against the environment as much as anything else, and we had excuse me, a pollster telling me last week in Oklahoma, only 5% of Republicans that Republicans who vote in all primaries, only 5% of those people are happy with the direction the country is going in.
Record low.
Record low. And, it's why you have people like Donald Trump and you've seen the popularity of Bernie Sanders. So there is a throw the bums out atmosphere to some extent, even though really nationally, no Republicans or Democrats, I don't think, have lost their primaries because of that. I mean, there was a Republican who lost last night in North Carolina, was it? But that was because 2 Republicans were put in the same district, 2 incumbents. So.
Right. Chris, let's move on to some other topics out of Washington. One is defense spending. You had a story today about a bill that relates to commissaries on military bases, and John McCain's effort to privatize some of that work. I believe it was Jim Inhofe led the charge against that, and he was successful. Give us just a little bit of background on what that's all about, and maybe
Sure.
why McCain wants to do it and why Inhofe is so opposed.
I think, one reason, Owen, that John McCain is the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee and an absolute expert on defense. No one would ever argue that. And so is Jim Inhofe. And
Right.
they're both Republicans. They're both senior members of the Armed Services Committee. They just happen to really disagree on this issue. John McCain, like all Republicans and on these military, on these armed services committees, really is trying to find every dime for the military right now. As you know, I've written about, there have been a lot of cuts
Right.
in military spending over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's really frustrating to these Republicans, especially on armed services. So he's looking for every dime. He says the subsidy for commissaries, which are grocery stores, we should say grocery stores on military bases,
Right.
subsidized by the taxpayer, so they pay lower prices,
Right.
is costing $1 billion a year.
Right.
And that if you bring in, he says there's 3 private companies right now ready to come in and try to sell groceries on these bases, and that they might actually be able to do it cheaper, and that maybe, hey, we might even be able to get revenue from them out of it. Well,
Right.
there's a real fear among military families. Military families don't consider this as, just they consider this part of their benefit.
Right,
Part
sure.
of their, I mean,
Most of them aren't getting rich as airmen and as.
they are absolutely not.
So if they can save a little bit of money on their milk every week, they want to be able to do that, and understandably so.
You know this. I mean, you have a lot of connections to military people in your own family, and this is really one of those things that a lot of people don't know, and it's absolutely maddening to me. But there are military people on food stamps. So not to get into all of that, but the Inhofe, this is the second year in a row that he has shot down this pilot program to privatize, because he's worried once they get a foot in the door, there's no reversing this.
Right.
And he just doesn't want to go down that road at all. He considers this, worth it. This is, part of their benefits. This is part of being in the military. You get to shop at commissaries. The prices are cheaper. That's the way it's going to stay. So he won again overwhelmingly for the second year in a row to knock down this privatization thing.
One other quick topic, and again, it deals with Senator Inhofe, his effort to revise the Toxic Substances Control Act. Hasn't been revised in 40 years. He's making a push to overhaul that, and he's having some success, right?
Yeah, it's done.
Yeah,
it's on the way. The president says it's one of those things. It's we talk and write so much about how little they accomplish up here, and this is actually a pretty big deal.
And it was a bipartisan deal too.
It's a very bipartisan deal. It was actually passed last night, got final legislative passes in the Senate by voice vote.
Wow.
But it's the first time that they've overhauled the regulatory process for every kind of chemical that, in our homes, cars, everywhere, that we're surrounded by all these chemicals all the time, and companies are constantly introducing new chemicals, into, products
Sure.
of all kinds. And there's been just kind of this broken regulatory system for looking at these chemicals, deciding whether they're safe, deciding how they need to be handled. And this is Jim Inhofe here, who's about as anti-regulation.
Right, that's exactly right. Yeah, he's not pro-regs. That's right.
He's not pro-reg. So they've, after a long time, I think a couple of years of working on this very hard behind the scenes, they came up with an agreement that will, overhaul this regulatory process, give the EPA, kind of new authority in regulating all these chemicals. And everybody says it's a great deal, and it's on the way to the president's desk. So they do accomplish something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Chris,
it never gets any attention when it's that,
Sure.
There's
sure. Not real sexy, is it?
It's not real sexy. There's no flashpoint issue on there.
Right. Well, Chris Castile in Washington, thanks a million for taking time, and
Got to do it, Owen.
And always good to see you. Take care.
Thanks, Owen.
And thank you for joining us here on News OK.